So, as you know, I'm Bernard Siegel, Executive Director of the Regenerative Medicine Foundation and Chair of the World Stem Cell Summit. Also, I direct the Healthspan Action Coalition. And one of the mainstays of that coalition of 70 organizations that are trying to provide a healthy lifespan for the world, using all the tools, including regenerative medicine. One of our leaders is the Director of Distributive Justice and Health Equity, my friend, Dr. Desiree Cox, who just pulled off an astonishingly successful meeting in Nassau, the Bahamas, with some of the world's leading experts that also represented the field of regenerative medicine and longevity. So all I can say about Desiree Cox, besides being the leader of stem cells in the nation of the Bahamas, she is a public figure. Her face is depicted on a Bahamian postage stamp as the first Rhodes Scholar from the Bahamas, the first woman Rhodes Scholar from the Caribbean nations. She is attended Cambridge. She attended Oxford. She is a brilliant communicator and a leader of our field. And when we bring this ship home, and these therapies that we are discussing come around to the entire world, we will have, in part, a very important part, Desiree Cox to thank. Thank you, Desiree, and I'm sorry I interrupted your brilliant introduction.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Bernie, for that very kind introduction. I'm going to say a little bit about, I'd like this section to be discursive and exploratory, and I say that because we are at a very interesting time in history, in the history and the paradigm shifts in health and medicine. We're at a point where you have a confluence of a number of different strands of medicine coming together that have not been brought together before. You have the digital health, the AI that we're touching on. You have the regenerative medicine stand, which comes with a philosophy that we have in our bodies the ability to regenerate, rejuvenate. Our bodies have the ability to heal themselves with the right nudging. That comes with a different philosophy to the philosophy of the previous paradigm, which was very much a disease, a bullet, a target, a specific focus. So there is that shift. You have also devices being brought into that picture, and as well as that, you have a shift with a recognition of the importance of the behavioral science and the behavioral technologies of that. There are more components to that confluence, but the confluence offers a unique opportunity. It offers an opportunity, I think, from the equity, distributive justice point of view, to shift the goalposts and redefine some of those definitions that we've had, which I think are from 2 centuries ago and have not been in step with the science. And so we are operating with philosophy of democracy, a philosophy of libertarianism, a philosophy of utilitarianism, all of these great philosophical ideas that are not in step with our current reality, which is that we are embedded in a reality of some of the most powerful, persuasive tools ever to be unleashed on human beings. So the power of persuasion and those persuasive tools has shifted the very fabric of what it means to be human, and that has implications for how we see equity, how we see distribution of wealth, how we see the distributive justice, or the common sense distributive justice definition, which is that we want the tools of health and healthcare to be distributed equitably. What does that even mean in our world? So we're at a very exciting, I think, opportunity. I want to begin also by pushing you a bit further than the diabetes dad definition of of advocacy. And I'll lean forward, you know, the way those politicians lean forward at the podium. I'll do a bit of that. And that is, the idea of advocacy is also due for an overhaul. We have the sense of the advocate as someone who's the tree hugger, who's on there with the placards and the beating of the drums, and that is a very valuable form of advocacy. It is critical and it should not go away. But for us to really survive, and I do mean survive, this evolution of health, medicine, and life, given what's in the background, we need to reframe this so that everyone is an advocate. Like every person in this room is an advocate for future health. That means that we are advocates by virtue of the stories and the path that have brought us to this conversation. Nobody in this room, if they're medical, went to university, there's nobody young enough for that, went to university with a sense of what regenerative medicine was. Nobody trained for that, nobody went to university with that, nobody had that in mind. It was not on the cards, which means it was some unique path, and likely that path related to something is not right in the House of Denmark. Something is not right with the organized misery that we call healthcare. Something is off with that, and I'm actually going to find a solution, or I'm actually going to be a beacon for something else. That makes you, whether you're a scientist, whether you're someone who, a loved one who's had an illness that, for which there was an unmet need, that makes you an advocate. So I wanted to begin by shifting the thinking around what advocacy might be in this new shift in the world, and also making a call for a rethink around distributive justice. I'm going to talk about, there are going to be three different phases of, three touch points that I want to come to as I share different perspectives around future health, distributive justice, equity, and advocacy. And the first begins with this phase for me, and I'll link that with my own path. So I begin medical school at Oxford. I'm very pleased with myself because I'm at Oxford, and I'm just being honest with you. I'm very pleased with myself, and I'm very excited to be there. And I love the science. And then I get to the clinical part of medicine. And within the first 4 weeks, literally the first term of being in the clinical medicine, I am struck by this, it's almost a shock that the medicine that we practice is so primitive. And I have this, it's a bit of a disconnect because I'm a baby medical student. I'm just in the clinical part. I have no business speaking about anything being primitive based on knowledge. This is coming from somewhere else and somewhere internal. And I have a curiosity of how did we get a medicine that looked like this? So I was derailed from my trying to be like all the others path by a series of internal questions, which were, why does it look like this? How did it get to be like this? What leads to, what shaped medicine? And that really directed my path. And one of the very early things that I came to notice, I spent my mornings between, people have heard this part of my story before, between 5 a.m. and 8 reading philosophy and just gobbling anything I could find. I then went on to the clinic on the, and did, all the junior doctor things with my medical Oxford textbook of medicine in my pocket and bounced around like all the normal doctors. And then in the evenings, I went to all these lectures on medical anthropology and everything. And I happened to belong to a community, the Rhodes Scholar community, where people were asking different kinds of questions. And so people directed me to these other perspectives. And one thing that became clear in my inquiry while I was training to be a doctor, was an observation of this shift. Right on this side, you have Vesalius. You have the foundation of medicine, which is that screaming-looking person on there is the patient, is the pathological stance, and you have Vesalius representing the anatomizing of the body. And that picture of the anatomizing of the body became a theme for, this is around 15-something, this is the 16th century, really was a theme for the way medicine ran right through to the 19th, early 20th century. We were trained, we went to anatomy class, we dissected, we had the body as a part of that picture. And the concept of anatomizing was very popular, certainly in the 18th, 19th century. If you want to understand a thing, you anatomized it. Well, here's the thing that people like Susan Sontag, Oliver Sacks, Foucault, and others started to unpack, which was there's something else going on with that. That is a power dynamic. That is a professional power dynamic. The patient is this lying down person. The professional is the all-knowing interrogator. The patient is flat on their back and vulnerable and needs that. All the clinical examinations require that. And the professional is standing and fully clothed and fully standing in their power. And that has a psychic and psychological, that is a psychological component of the dynamic of what it means to be a patient, which means you require defending, you require, you don't know, you're vulnerable, and the doctor or the professional who is knowing and providing the answers. People like Sachs begin to point to the fact that these are people, and they have stories, they have lives, and they are integrating what looks like illness in an illness to you that you are putting into a category, into the way they live and how they live. People like Bruno Latour are pointing out to the fact that science itself is a social act, that science is not something that's dissected from the normal way of living. It is social. So I want you to see that this is the 20th century, early 21st century, late 20th century, but this is the beginning of an important shift that has implications for what we're describing. More recently, people who have been looking at AI have come to, and I'm very impressed with these guys, Raskin and Harris, Tristan, who are suggesting that we might see technology with 3 critical rules. The first rule is when we invent a new technology, we uncover a new class of responsibility. That technology confers power. If it confers power, it starts a race. And if we don't coordinate, the race will end in tragedy. And I want to use the clinical trial as an example of that in our time. So the clinical trial comes into being as a new technology. The first randomized controlled clinical trial in 1947. It's a trial of streptomycin. It's a trial that's for tuberculosis. It's run by the Medical Research Council. It's the first of its kind. I want you to note the year that is happening. Okay, this is after the Second World War, and the issue is of rationing. We have only a fixed amount of streptomycin. We need to make sure that that is most fairly distributed, so fairness is very much a part of how that is done. And one of the founders of the randomization concept, Austin Bradford Hill, had been looking for a case to bring this in, and streptomycin was the perfect case. It satisfied exactly what the government of the day needed. It needed a fair way to distribute the medicines. It also allowed you to determine efficacy. That technology uncovered a new class of responsibilities that ultimately leads to the establishment of the first IRB in the US, which is in about 74, and various other federal laws that follow. So that's an example of a new technology. It's a human technology, but it requires you to think differently about rational science. Right now, with future health technologies, I want to stay with clinical trials, we have a similar thing. I want you to consider future health technologies like stem cell or regenerative medicine as a new technology. It uncovers a new class of responsibilities. The new class of responsibilities that it uncovers very much linked to what we're talking with distributive justice, which is who gets those therapies, who gets included in those clinical trials, who even knows about those clinical trials, where those clinical trials take place, who's managing the clinical trials that are phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials that happen outside of the United States. And when that data is repatriated back to the United States as a part of an FDA IND, who gets to be a part of that? We're very limited. And so when you think about distributive justice then, and you think about equity, and it does touch on what your colleague before talked about with education, it's not just about education. It is about transparency and access. Because you can be educated up to the hilt about the concept of this, but if you have no idea that right next door to you, that there's an opportunity for that, you'll never know about it. And if your physician, we're coming back to that power dynamic, has no idea and has very strange misconceptions about regenerative medicine, even if you raised it to your physician, you might be shot down in that encounter, in that power dynamic encounter, and deterred from exploring it further. So there is a responsibility that comes with these new technologies that relates to, uncovers this responsibility. It's a responsibility of us to be educators, which is why that is advocacy. You are an advocate for people having these opportunities, for people knowing about it. You're an advocate for better science and better research being done on it. You're an advocate for, in cases where there are opportunities for a better option, that is presented to you because the person who is leading and guiding your care knows that. And you are an advocate for the meaning of something very different called your physician healthcare provider. You're an advocate for a complete reframing of what that relationship looks like. That technology confers power and will start a race. We have that problem right now. We are right there. We have people who are dividing the world, some of our so-called good actors, into good actors and bad actors, okay? The world has never been black and white. It has never been that. It's always been this interesting collage of grays and purples and pinks and whatever. But one of the challenges of good actors gossiping about, attacking, stabbing, this person's stem cells are bad, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, that person's an idiot, that person's a loser, personalizing companies that they don't know in the interest of competitiveness, that is the race we are in. So if you're a patient, how do you have any chance of understanding what is reality, what is fake, what is deep fake, what is real, what is true? How you're barely getting your head around the new tech, okay? Now you're being asked to do the due diligence around the technology itself. And when you go to people who are experts, they have skin in the game because they've got their cells they want you to be using, and they will not, and they're not telling you necessarily the full story. And why this does matter is because this tech is expensive to develop. This is not cheap tech to do clinical trials around. This costs a lot of money. There is a lot of money at stake. There are only a handful of investors, pretty much the pool, a kind of introverted pool of investors who have a piece of all these pies, by the way, okay, even though their PIs are fighting with each other. And so there is a race, and if we don't coordinate that race, there will be tragedy for many of these therapeutics that have a lot of potential. And we are already seeing that. And it takes therapies a long time to come back from being squashed or having a reputational attack. And at the same time, we have some truly bad actors who are being investigated by the FDA. So there is a race. There is power and money in this picture, and it is really important, if you're an advocate of future health, which I would like all of you to be, for you to become an advocate of forms of transparency and truth-telling, registries that allow people to know what is out there and what is approved and what is not, and that these things can take various different forms. And that you're also an advocate for changing the debate. So the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. When that came out, and it was said by Gibson in 2003, we in Future Health have really gravitated towards that being fantastic. But the future's never been evenly distributed. When has the future ever been evenly distributed? Okay. So what's interesting is not that statement, which is spot on, but that it resonates with us so differently now because of the world we live in. Humans are now hackable animals. That comes about because of the true awakening of the power of persuasion and supercomputers that are being pointed at us every day, every time you're on Facebook and Snapchat and all the social media, and the way that has an addictive quality. The reality is humans have always been hackable. It is in fact the failure to recognize that led to the success and the rise of Big Pharma, because doctors always considered that they could not be advertised to. Some of those people out there who were not us could not be advertised to, but we had the power to recognize when we were being advertised to, and we could turn it off. And one of my great shifts was after medical school and after the PhD, looking at the history of clinical trials. I practiced psychiatry for some time, but after that, also worked on the business side of pharma. And it was a shock to me to find that there was this undercurrent world of med pharm, medical communications, of companies that focused on designing studies and writing papers and placing them in exactly the journals that me in my specialty would be reading 3 or 4 or 5 years ahead, so that it would occur to me as the obvious choice to prescribe. And I would be there defending it, when in fact all of that had been very carefully and strategically planned. And I had been advertised to from the very beginning, and all of my predecessors in medicine had been advertised to. One of the most beautiful examples of that in the common world that I always love to tell is the story of the Betty Crocker cake. So the Betty Crocker cake, when Betty Crocker came out with the cake in the box and whatever, it had that, did a focus group in the way that you did it, and all the women came around. And they were not getting the traction they wanted to get. And so someone made the suggestion of adding an egg. Okay, so they added an egg they set up so you had to add an egg, and then you would make the cake, and people picked it up. Because no housewife wanted something so easy that it meant that they weren't gonna, they had to do something. And so that is one of the classic many mechanisms of advertising that goes back to just plugs it at our amygdala. We want to be better than the guy next door or the girl next door. We want to turn up better. We're more we have all that going on, and so we have been hackable from the very beginning. What's different is the extent and the speed and the power at which our brain chemistry is being used against us. And this final statement of recognizing that only 77% of heritability really will determine your age. And in fact, the 70%, you're 70% in control, at a lowest level. I look at that and I think, really? Really? If I'm telling you that in fact, most of your demography, where you live, what schools you went to, what you studied, where you are actually shaping your health on a daily basis, how much control do you actually have on any of that, really? So this is a time when we really, when we're flushing out what distributive justice looks like now, what equity looks like now, what advocacy should look like. This is a time for us to push back on some of those tried and trusted options that we have fallen in. And I have 3 things that I advise people to do that I think are critical. Awareness and curiosity. Education is important, but if you're not aware and you're not curious, you're not going to find it. And I can flood you with as much information as possible. Your awareness and curiosity is what will get you to find the right answer. And more than ever, it is important, I say, be true to know yourself and be true to yourself. This is very critical. We are all individual, we are all different, we have all had incredibly different pathways. We need to be at a point where the narrative, the story, the journey towards this discovery is as critical as the destination. We should get less inspired by the polished and perfect perfections on stage. They are not real. They are not real, and we need to push back against what is real and what is not. Secondly, a conversational nature of reality is what we should be moving towards, and dissolving that doctor-patient divide, which is long overdue. Patients are not submissive. Everyone in this room, will at some point be on the other side of the category called illness, and how would we want to be treated? Advocacy, I've already talked about that. And make no small plans. Join something. Okay, I know that you will have your own organization. Bernie talked about the Healing Future Health Summit that I run in the Bahamas annually, and I have also been a part of of the Healthspan Action Coalition. We cannot do this on our own. Your individual projects are fantastic. Your individual advocacy focus is critical, but join somebody else's. Join what other people are doing. Be part of a movement that can provide support and open your minds with a different perspective to the way you might have been seeing it before. And you only get that when you're hitting up against people who may even be people you don't particularly like, but people who are, slightly different and slightly irritating, but have something else going on, but that it kind of is the gristle that will force you to look and see things a bit differently. And that is so join something, okay? Don't do this on your own. Don't fall prey to what the social media worlds are telling you, which is, if you go on YouTube, you find it all out there, okay? Make no small plans. We need a world that is more resilient. We need a world that is open to thinking about these issues of distributive justice together. Please get my email address and details. We're starting to write about this. Contact me and let's talk. I'd love to hear your ideas on how we create the future together. Thank you. Oh yes, questions.
Desiree, you bring so much wisdom, but at the same time, with a level of humility that I'm not used to encountering with people with that number. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make, everybody wants to bring their end, okay? Everybody does want to be part of something great and to change things and improve things. But I was sitting here and I was thinking, you know, when we look for information, we go to Google and we'll find what we want to find.
Correct.
We'll find the statement and
That's
the
right.
MD and the PhD that agrees with us.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be great if somebody much smarter than me could come up with a search engine that will give you the answer you want, but then give you a percentage of how many contrary views are out there as well that maybe you should take a peek at?
I love that idea. I love that idea, and I really think that is one of the beauties of the art of conversation, that when you're in a room with that kind of, you will start to get a feel for maybe there's another view, maybe there's another percentage. And I think one of the things I'm going to be a part of or joining, I met Azar and we completely hit it off, is this humane technology. Because we know that the aim of the Googles, the Facebooks, is to keep your attention. And you might be that you personally might be interested and open to seeing the percentage of opinions or against that don't agree with you, but many people won't. And so what is clear that the business of that work is to just keep you scrolling, whatever is going to keep you scrolling, whatever is going to keep you there. And when you get that bit of information that puts you in context, as it were, puts you in a broader context of not just me, but the other opinions, you might stop. You might think, okay, well, only 20% of the people in the world agree with me, or 50% agree with me. That might be the end of I can move on to something else. And so we need the support of tech. This is not an anti-tech rampage. We need the support of tech, but for it to be our helpers, as you say, to help us with better decision making. And that's one of the great examples. I'd love to know, that was a great wild idea, that you're in the 1% of people who think that's true of the world, or you're in the or you might think that's a wild, innovative idea, but actually 75% people already do that, and there's tech already out there doing that. Don't go and create it yourself. Go and find what's already out there. So I 100% agree with that as an idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. So my question is, we want to bring health span medicine to all. And you correctly said there are some cell-based therapies that are quite a problem, challenge from the manufacturing side, from the engineering side. But we have strategies that may be considered not so elevated tech, when there's not so much engineering, genetic engineering that needs to happen on a single patient, that actually render the cells safer, more applicable, and even cheaper to manufacture. Now, so we can consider this as not such extreme tech, but still effective. We care about treatments that are effective. Now the question is, how do we inform or suggestions on how we can reach a broad population of patients or individuals at risk with strategies that benefit, that bring a benefit to them?
That's I think it's a really great question for us to have and play with. We have a couple of things to work against, which is that sense that people think that there is already a picture out there of what their advanced technologies look like, and it's less sexy to recognize that actually exercise still remains one of and many of the lifestyle medicine indicators still remain the most important thing that you can do around longevity, the most tried and trusted thing. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think the question that you've raised is one that needs to be in the questions that we're asking. What about that kind of tech that is maybe not as sexy, but works and is cheaper and is available and will do the trick? How do we have a conversation about comparative technologies that are relevant for the individual person? I think that also feeds into a different kind of conversation about consent, but that's something we can have offline. But I saw you with a question, or was it no question? There was just nodding. It was friendly nodding. We like friendly nodding.
I'm just so thrilled to be here. I'm always thrilled to be here. It always seems to be the right time for my heart and my mind. But I think that part of this discussion has to, of what we do when we talk about technology and access, is that all technology has always started off in a rarefied state, meaning, and it's always been expensive. I mean, if you go back to gunpowder, I'm sure it's other tech, printing press, all of that,
Yeah.
right? And I think we lose an opportunity in our talks to address that and say, yes, it has always been that.
That's the process. This is the process.
That's part of the process, and that
But-
unawareness or
But,
not.
but I'm going to push back on that and say I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder, and I have an instinct, could be right or wrong, but it is an instinct for me, that there needs to be an intentional approach towards, an intentionality towards affordability that isn't really there. That I have and I think that for me the equivalent is the trickle-down economics. You know, when does it trickle down? It kind of never does really. And I honestly believe that there needs to be, we're at a stage where I don't know who sets the prices for these stem cell technologies, but some of the prices just make me want to throw up, really. They're just, I mean, I cannot see the justification for them. And increasingly, I am finding that they needn't be that high. So I wonder, what's the process whereby we grab that bull by the horn and intentionally start having a conversation about
I think
pricing?
that you're right, and that's what I'm saying about pointing to what traditionally it has been, right? And looking at that and learning why that's been, how that's been, and then how do we change that? And also looking at how technology now will be able, using technology, I come from a design thinking, humane thinking background. How do we use that in order to accelerate that? And I think that's what's different now than it has been in the past, is that we now have that ability to accelerate that process. But if in our discussions of pricing and things like this point, if we keep saying it costs too much, without saying the pattern has always been that eventually technology becomes cheaper, and without saying, okay, we are going to accelerate that.
But I'm going to push back a bit more and say, here's what I am seeing a lot of, which is there's also a mindset theme that goes in there, and it's called the sexy researcher biotech mindset. The story goes like this. The hero story goes like this. Biotech person sees something, starts to maybe develop something in their research lab. Maybe they're in an academic research lab. They go off and spin off a biotech company. Everyone is a businessman. Everyone is the next Steve Jobs. Everyone is going to, go public, okay? They go public. They start realizing that maybe it's not as straightforward as all that, maybe, it's not as straightforward in the run of things as possible. And various other components that we don't want to speak to influence this. There is a narrative that these guys are all running along that keeps that pricing needs to fit that story. Because for me to have the great success and then have the company, I'm immediately thinking about, I stop thinking, or I'm balancing thinking about access and patience and affordability and when I'm going to cash out. I'm also in a Silicon Valley mindset that says the prices go to a certain point, I go public, whatever, and I cash out, okay? There is a narrative that biotech for healthcare and regenerative medicine is running along that I think is very seductive and is very hard for people to step away from and is not great for pricing and patience. But it is great for the story that says, I'm going to be Steve Jobs, I'm going to cash out, I'm going to buy my 3 houses in Bermuda and my 10 boats and whatever I'm going to do with that. And then I'm going to spin off into the next big thing. And there are certain things that need to stay in place that aren't great for patients for me to get there. And I'm not attacking that, I'm just saying that is a reality. So we need a different narrative for success in this world for stem cell and regenerative medicine.
So, the cost of business, the cost of cells, the cost of management is, when we look at these prices, in the US, you can't do it in Canada anymore. You can go to Tijuana, you can go to all these different places.
Sometimes, some places in Eastern Europe.
So I'm going to do something that'll make you guys laugh. Because I'm a little... $1% in cost to manufacture a product. 1%. So, why aren't we giving this away? Why not? So I do something kind of odd. I give it away. I help people for a living. That's the price. Everything you said, the problem is that at 100%, you drive a Lamborghini. And everyone does. But then you got the FDA in the middle of it. So, at the end of the day, it isn't cost. It's all the people around us that are asking us for money. Who wants money? The FDA. Who wants money? Everybody else does. The hospitals do. Everyone wants it. Everyone wants to sell the product. Now the prices are just astronomical. So that 1%
Is the cost of the product.
It's gone up. Just in 7 years, it's gone up 3,000%. But my point is, it's still, it doesn't, the cost is really inexpensive.
So-
If I could ask, is that cost you building in all the development costs, the $2.5 billion to study and develop the drug from scratch? Does that capture that?
No, it doesn't. Because what happens? Someone walks out your door and gives it to someone. They don't do the research. They steal the research. Everything's not really that fair. I mean, a lot of information, a lot of people have a lot of great deal of knowledge. And the knowledge is amazing. I mean, this guy here, I've known him for 8 years now, and one of the smartest guys I know. And I read everything that he publishes. And I send it to people, and I say this, and I add to it. It's the knowledge. He writes it, I read it, and I use it.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, everyone.
So, yeah, and
everyone
so
publishes-
you're-
you publish something, I've seen your stuff.
Yep.
I use it.
So exactly. So the question for me then, this is where we're talking about the distributive justice now. You can see why you cannot have a distributive justice, a mature, modern distributive justice debate that's talking about egalitarianism and libertarianism and the old biotech stories. Because you can see that is not on the sharp end of what it is we're talking about. It needs to be bringing in the pricing, it needs to be bringing these realities you're describing, and it needs to be bringing in the science, because that is what is making, those are key barriers to this being equitably distributed, and options being equitably distributed.
People are using their favorite phrases today.
Yes.
And my favorite one of mine is the best is the enemy of better.
What was that?
Best is the enemy of better.
Best is the enemy of better.
Yes.
There are a lot of low-hanging fruit in regenerative medicine that could be available to patients right now. And they're not being pursued in a way that's equitable
Yeah.
and available to Joe Public
Yeah.
and Jane Public.
Yeah.
Because there isn't the model for the investment of the development of a tech that is not going to earn a lot of money.
That's right.
It's absolutely obvious. We know that to be true. Much smarter people in the room than me know that to be true.
Yeah.
Everybody knows 100, 300 people in Boston that are currently looking for a job because they're part of a biotech company that has just gone up.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't used to that, but thank you for it, because that's much better than what I was going to say.
I try to be nice.
Our model of supporting biotech is completely broken. So you get a guy with nice hair standing up in a room that's getting a whole bunch of money in one go from a philanthropist that they are then set on a path that they cannot shake from.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
But if they got a little bit of money, start developing your tech, oh no, we've got to change this. Then have a little bit more money.
Yeah.
I mean, is that crazy what I'm
Yeah.
suggesting?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's why it's
Yeah,
broken.
but you have to tell them you have to change for a reason. Why? You go from this spot. Well, now you have to go to this spot. You're there. You have to go to this spot too. Well, remember, he needs payment. He needs money. He needs more money. And he keeps paying. That money is not really spent on the project itself. Only a small percentage is actually put into the project.
I'm not stopping this session.
Yeah.
Because there are better meetings and there are best meetings. World Stem Cell Summit is the best meeting. So continue until someone drives you out of the room. I don't care.
So everyone always says, I need a new car. See, I'm on both sides of the fence. I'm on the science side, I'm on the business side. But my side of it is that this product, the stem cell business, the stem cell projects, they're amazing.
Yeah.
But you get so many people, their hands in it so deep that they want to have every dime possible.
Yeah.
And I save you.
There's a lot of greed, and
I will
it's
shock
just.
you.
Yeah.
I used to drive a really, really nice Maserati. One day I woke up and I goes, Juan, you need to cut back. So I bought a low-end Tesla. It's different. And there's so much you can pull back on. There's so much this product does. I mean, it's amazing. It's incredible. I get to see it all the time.
Mhm.
I travel around the United States. I travel around the world now. I went to Italy without you. So,
Yes.
wonderful things.
You and then the lady at the back. Yes. Yeah.
So personally, I think there's a.
Can you speak up really loudly? Because I can tell you're saying something important.
I think there's a huge gap here in our country between the bench and public policy.
Yes.
So that our science is there, technology is there. How do we get it to Congress and to Senate and get their support? I mean, we've known this for a long time, which is probably one of the reasons that CERN was created in California. We said, well,
Yeah.
we're going to go ahead. We're not getting any help from the federal government, Congress, Senate. We need more scientists. We need more doctors in Congress and in the Senate because they don't know what they're talking about, quite frankly. We need more doctors that know where to invest some of the funds and
And
end some
policy.
of the suffering that our people are enduring here in our country. We need a think tank like they have in other countries where Parkinson's, MS, ALS, put them together, you got Huntington's.
Yeah.
My children lost their dad. I lost all three of my children. And we know the technology is there. We know the scientists know that the mutant protein is in chromosome 4. We know that. We know that if they had sufficient funding, put all these brilliant people together, we'd have the treatment. But we don't. We have no support from the federal government. We have no. So there needs to be something to happen to take it
Yeah.
from the bench.
To that. And so one of the initiatives around the health span action is just that, which is the recognition that there are many different patient advocacy hubs. It takes a lot to run those hubs and to get that information network. And so for many people in that area, the single focus has to be what that disease or that illness. But the much bigger conversation to do what you're describing requires a band of 150 different or more different patient advocacy groups or universities who are focused on health span and who can, as a body, move to Congress and say, look, this is what the decision needs to be, and it will positively affect all of us. So that was part of the drive around health span action. Is part of why I agreed to join Bernie on the distributive justice side, because if you try to have this conversation that looks like it's on the subject of how much money people make, people will immediately falls into this kind of Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, commie, socialist, weirdo conversation, okay? And so the idea is to let's evolve our thinking around distributive justice, because it cuts across all of the illnesses, all of the broader picture of health span. And let's see a health span action coalition as a place that can go to Congress and lobby for one thing that is going to be valuable for everyone across all of these groups, because it allows government and policy officials to say they're doing something that cuts across many different constituencies. And so that was very much the thinking around Bernie starting that and starting to pull together the people who would be in the hub, and why I became a part of that. And so you wanted say something, and then yes. So I love that this is such a dynamic conversation.
Thank you so much for bringing up your own personal story at Oxford and how you dug in deep to sort of learn the other ways of knowing.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things I'm thinking about what you said and what your organization is trying to do is centered around lobbying, which I think is important. However, it seems to me, to address your questions around business and money, that's a much deeper issue that goes back to 2 laws that were put into place in the 1980s. So I was educated in biotech, like that's my story. And I remember very vividly when the first biotech companies emerged,
Yeah.
and we were recruited. And it struck me as odd that an academic university would receive federal money and then be able to patent, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
we saw this with Wharf, we saw this, the early days of stem cells.
Yep.
And it seems to me that if you really want to get to the bottom of this, the lobbying and creating new laws around, orphan diseases or whatever we want to call them, is not really the way to go. It
Yeah.
needs to go back and revisit that moment when we decided that federal money could be made into profit, right? To me, that is the crux of the issue. If you want equity and distribution, you almost need to go back to procedural justice
That's interesting.
and think about putting anthropologists, philosophers
Yeah.
into that space
Yeah.
to think about how to change that dynamic. Because
Yeah.
if you don't change that,
I'm
it
all
will
in favor
always
of
be
that.
the money that drives everything, right? I think yesterday we heard about, I think it was, Anthony was talking about how, if you go out to the exhibit hall right now, it's all these cosmetic companies
Yeah.
basically funding the medical research. And, Illinois had a beauty tax that they put forth, for stem cell research, that any plastic surgery would have a tax on it that would then fund the public stem cell initiative.
Yeah.
It seems to me that none of those things went forward in any state. That to me is critical.
That is
That's
critical.
an easy way
So
to fund this.
yeah, and so one of the, Bunny mentioned that I'm from the Bahamas, which is where the country of my birth, and I consult with the Bahamas government to around outside the United States stem cell ethics committee stuff. But I also live in New York, so so I'm a combination of many things. So I'm a Brit, I'm Bahamian, and I live in New York. But one thing that was a driver for me setting up that annual summit in 2018 was coming back to your point, which is the Bahamas government set up laws to have oversight and safe practice of stem cell research for U.S. companies, Bahamian companies, but we knew it would mainly be U.S. companies who would come to the U.S., who would come to the Bahamas, set up shop in partner with a Bahamian physician or facility, and have those typically FDA, IND authorized products available. But what I started to notice was there was a limit to how much those guys actually gave back. And they could get away with not giving back much because they could say in their application forms they would, and they would make these treatments available at a fraction of the price of Bahamians, but Bahamians know nothing about it. And Bahamians have strange ideas around, are they slaughtering babies in the back door or something, whatever. If they have those stigmas, and no one is paying attention to breaking those stigmas, they have no access. So people have this idea around democratizing. You said the internet democratizes. No, it doesn't. It floods, it makes information available. I could have that information right in front of me and have no access to it because my mindset does not allow me to see it. And so I realized, 2018, I had the summit, we brought science and technology kids from 14 to 17 who were the top STEM kids, and we embedded them in the adult summit because I wanted them to see the future. I wanted them to be able to ask questions. I wanted their minds were already fresh. But when we did 2019 for this year that we just did it, I wanted the nursing students and the medical students and the doctors to come in, and they were blown away asking those questions. They were asking, how do we be a part of that? How, how do I make sure that the patients who I advocate for can have this? How do I even mention it? There were people in that country who had no idea that over 700 to 1,000 patients have been treated since 2015 safely. But they had no idea. Many of their physicians were offering these therapeutics. They had no idea. And so people have this idea that somehow if the information is everywhere, it's democratized. No, it's not. If my universe is so small that I cannot allow that, and I'm not allowing those other pictures, I can't see it. I have no access to that. So your point is really critical. The summit, the purpose of the summit was to do that, but it was also to shift the picture that people have that, to your point, great science, great work, great stuff only happens in North America. I mean, we have a very narrow picture of it's not happening in the United States. I'm like, and so we've got to have this. We've got to also shift up. That genius happens everywhere. That great work can happen anywhere in the world, and we need to acknowledge that. So these are procedural justice issues. These are anthropological issues. And these are issues that are about getting that access doesn't mean that it's right. To access it, I need to open my mind. Access is a mental process amongst other things. And get real, as you did so beautifully about the business side and the cost side of things, because people stand on these stages, they talk about the presentation of their studies and whatever, and my heart sinks because it's just, but you're not telling me that it's impossible. You're saying it's available and it's around the corner, but I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, how do I get that? You know, how does my sister get that? My sister, who had rheumatoid arthritis, went to her GP, her rheumatologist, who told her she'd have to spend her life on sulfa drugs and prednisolone. It was like, no, you're not. That is not going to be your life. So being an advocate for my sister meant that she went lifestyle medicine, peptides, totally turned that around after 4 years, completely normal biomarkers, decided to treat herself because she was, exercise, fitness, all the rest, decided to treat herself to, she was 55, wanted to be in a kind of bikini, she said a bikini competition at 55, okay, we were all like, well, I don't know. Anyway, she decided to, she became the national bodybuilding and fitness champion in her category of over 50. And for her, she did it she just came back from another pro competition as a celebration of the triumph of that, of what her not being able to move in the morning. My sister's a project manager, PhD, that's not her world. But that journey took her to having to totally turn her life around to not end up spending her life on sulfa drugs and prednisolone. And she had, when her rheumatologist told her that, she thought that was her only option. So I say all that to say we have a lot of work to do around access that is about changing minds, changing hearts, being more transparent, as well as the legal stuff. So thank you so much for this very rich discussion. And reach out to me. I'd love to connect with you all.
One was a business